desire? She didn't like me going before she went. How does one distinguish between a healthy desire and the craving of the ego? Stephen, Jan, you want to take a whack at that one?
Well, that's really it, isn't it? that's really the question. And it's really about discernment, isn't it? So this is why we need the Dharma, and why we need the separate self, and we need the thinking mind. We need to make a lot of decisions. And I think Jan said that the Dharma doesn't tell us specifically what to do and what not to do. There are too many permutations, or maybe it was you, David, I can't remember. But yeah, we have to decide ourselves. And we can have guidelines, we can have precepts, we can have examples, but ultimately, there's no answer to this question, except, and I'm going back to what you mentioned in your talk, David. The Buddha taught two things, you said, suffering and the end of suffering. And so I think that that's useful in discernment, like, do I do this or do I do that? Will this path lead to suffering, or will it lead to the end of suffering? And I think applying it in that way, just asking that simple question would be some kind of a North Star, some kind of a compass to get through.
To me, the crux of that question is sort of this difference between healthy desire and craving. And I think that's an important distinction, that sometimes people think in our practice, desire is out, and it's not. There are healthy desires. It's called chanda as versus tanha. And the difference between craving and what is chanda, a useful intention or aspiration, is actually this involvement of self. That craving always has I, me, mine involved. That craving is getting something for I, me, mine. And so investigating is what, is this aspiration or this intention or this desire, is it tied to a strong sense of I, me, mine? Or is it tied to some larger sense, larger purpose? And that doesn't mean that we don't ever do anything for I, me, mine, but we notice how strong is the pull? Is it appropriate? Is it not? Is it something that's needed? I mean, you can buy a pair of underpants for yourself. It's not that we're never doing things for ourselves, but we're noticing how strong is the impulse, and is it overwhelming those healthy desires that lead us towards towards generosity, towards kindness, towards compassion, towards awakening, towards strengthening our spiritual path.
I would just add that discernment is discernment becomes more of a positive possibility. The more we practice, the more we learn about ourselves, and the more we lessen our grip on the need to be right. Very quick story about myself. A few weeks ago, Mary and I were visiting some friends, and our friend had a brand new Tesla. Mm-hmm. And he said, you got to drive this. So I drove it, fell in love, had to have one. And the discernment I'm talking about is that there are subtle things at work here too. Oh, Tesla, yeah, I'll help the environment. And in fact, what was really going on was, I want a Tesla. And so that kind of discernment is very important too. The And the more we practice, the more open we are without self-recrimination, without the need to shut ourselves down, the more open we are to knowing that sort of thing. So the next question is a little bit lengthy, but I'll read it all. While in walking meditation, my awareness was very attuned to what was around me. The patterns of sunlight streaming in through my window, the shapes of the leaves on the plants, and the feeling of warmth while standing in the sunlight. It was a very meditative experience, even though I was not focusing on what was around me rather than what was inside of me. Is this something to embrace or not?
And my guess is that was a typo, because it's hard. I think it probably means even though I was focusing on what was around me rather than what was inside.
Got it. Right. Yeah. Thank you, Jen. So.
Okay, so I can start since I've jumped in already. Wonderful that you had that sort of experience in the walking. I think it's just noticing. Well, it's maybe comes down to that question. I was not focusing on what was around me rather than on what was inside of me. I guess I would say you were focusing on what was inside of you, because you were focusing on the feeling. If you were focusing on the story of how did those leaves grow, and what time is it, and what do I know about the sun, that's outside of you. But the things you're mentioning were feelings. They were internal relationship to what was occurring. And so that's where you want to stay. If you start going into stories about what you're seeing, that's going outside. So sometimes that outside-inside distinction is a little confusing. And I think it just comes back to discernment of noticing, okay, well, is this sort of a storyline, a fantasy, an image I'm trying to produce, or is this actually what's happening now, what is being directly experienced in the body, in the heart?
And part of the storyline is the I, me, mine part of the storyline. I mean, for me, it'd be easy for me to say, boy, I'm all about nature. Yeah, I love nature. Look at that leaf, and I think that maybe is part of one of the kind of stories that Jan was talking about. So just to be aware and to really I feel so much gratitude in nature. But also to be aware of when that gratitude turns to selfing, which it can quite easily.
Yeah, I agree. It's very well said. And if you look at the whole compendium of haiku that have been written, these haiku are about nature. And in their original form, their pure form, were about awakening moments in nature. And the distinction between practicing, that is, I'm doing walking meditation now, and enabling us to really merge with nature, our true nature, it's a false distinction. We have this idea that, well, okay, now I'm practicing, now I'm meditating, and everything else is somewhere else. No, the poems that I read in my talk, or recited in my talk, this happens, and it happens in nature a lot. Yeah, I mean, glad that you had that experience, and glad that you shared it with us. Thank you.
Okay. Is the idea of non-self compatible with the idea of an indwelling divinity or divine presence as found, for example, in Christian meditative traditions? I'm laughing because that question is being asked of 3 Jews, but Steve, why don't
Well, I was raised
Oh,
Christian too. I mean, I've done them all. I've done Christian, Jewish. I've been Taoist, shamanic. You know, been in men's drumming circle. I've done all this stuff. Anyway, um, is it compatible? Is the sense of the divine, a Christian sense, the indwelling Christ or the indwelling, is that compatible with a Buddhist view um, of non-self or nirvana? Wow. Um, yes,
yeah.
I could elaborate for a long time, but however it presents to you, we each come from different traditions. We've been steeped in different uh, teachings or non-teachings, which are teachings too. Um, and the awakened mind, the awakened, the heart is going to filter through our personality, and it's going to trickle down in the images that are in our minds. So yeah, I mean, if you just had lunch with God, go for it. That's no, I'm not going to argue about that. Buddhism does not postulate a God. It's true, um, but that doesn't mean that you can't bring it there in your practice. I mean, nirvana means extinguishing. It means you can't say what it is. It's a non-thing. Um, and one of the issues I think maybe that God is a thing, God's a form, God's an object, so it's created in the mind. But I'm not interested in quibbling. I'm a chaplain. I mean, if God is your Dharma door, great. If the soul has meaning for you, great, go with it.
I think the only place where I have encountered um, some incompatibility is some people. This happened actually in a prison, and there was one of the prison staff wanted to throw out the mindfulness and Buddhist um, um, groups that Jan, Stephen, and I have long been part of. And his reasoning was that the only answer to salvation is to turn yourself over entirely. And there are a lot of people who believe that, and I'm not judgmental about that, but in Buddhism, it's both the inward look and the outward look. We look inward to our own beauty, our own strengths, divinity, if you want to call it that, and the outward, which we've been talking about all weekend, which is we're all radically connected. So there are some incompatibilities, I think, for sure. I don't go there myself. I don't believe that, and I'm sorry that person said that. Fortunately, he didn't succeed, because we had a chaplain in the prison who had a much broader, a wonderful view of what all this is about. But I think from what we've been practicing this weekend, my answer would be no, not at all incompatible.
I don't really know anything probably about Christian meditative traditions, and a little bit about centering prayer, but I'm not sure I totally know how it would relate to this question. So can't specifically answer this question. However, I think what he's speaking, I mean, to me, when he says indwelling, or she, I don't know who it is, when the questioner says indwelling divinity, or they, to me, that speaks to soul, the issue of soul. And in my practice and in my understanding of the Buddhist teachings, not having a soul is a liberating concept, that because my understanding of soul is a permanent essence of who and what we are. And to me, that's limiting. And that's different than what the Buddha was pointing to when he talked about non-self. That in non-self, he was saying, you can keep peeling it away, peeling it away, peeling it away. There is nothing that's essentially me. It's all just processes, changing, moving. And so in my own practice, the release of that idea is liberating. So certainly in my own practice, indwelling divinity sounds like soul, and soul is contrary to my understanding of how the Buddha explained this fact of when we look at a river or at our person, there is nothing we can see that is constantly there. It is all we can see is a constantly changing process, that we can see what's there in this moment. We can see what might have been there 10 minutes ago, but that there's nothing that is essence that is always going to be there, that is the essence of me. And so to me, that's the absence of a soul.
Yeah, and that I think, Buddhists would certainly agree with that, Jan. I also, recognize that we're living in a country where soul is pretty much embedded in most people's consciousness, as well as God. And that in order to interface, we have to take those things into account based on who's speaking.
And I don't feel it's wrong. I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm saying how it's worked for me.
Yeah, and that's fine. I'd like to just make one little thing about this that Thich Nhat Hanh talks about, and which is talked about in the sutras and by many teachers. But he says it really clearly. He says there's a distinction between reincarnation and rebirth. So the Buddha was born into ancient India and was a Hindu. The Buddha, the Shakyamuni, before he was the Buddha, was a wandering sadhu in the Hindu tradition, one of many that wandered the continent. So he was steeped in the Hindu teachings. And the concept of soul, of Brahman, was fundamental. And one of his insights, one of the Buddha's insights about this was, this reincarnation thing sounds like a separate self moving through. And I would say one of the unfortunate outgrowths of that belief was the caste system, where they solidified that dogma into this rigid caste system. The Buddha and Thich Nhat Hanh, when he's talking about this, it says we're not focusing on reincarnation, we're talking about rebirth. And one of the analogies is if you play billiards and you have the cue ball and your cue stick, and you strike the cue ball and it zips off and hits another ball, and then that ball takes off. That's rebirth. The energy moves through the forms. And this, not just in relation to death of the body, but actually every season that passes, every breath we take, every moment, something is arising and something's passing away. So, I mean, we could spend a lot of time on this, but there is a fundamental distinction between the Buddhist view and the view of the Hindu view that I think Jan explained really very well.
Okay. We've heard a lot about paradox in this retreat. What exactly is paradox? A glitch that makes it impossible for our brains to process form and formlessness, for example, at the same time? Alan Watts famously said that paradox is a truth standing on its head to get our attention. I think maybe I mentioned paradox first, so I'll go. To my mind, it's not that, although close. Paradox to me is what to me is simple, but to a lot of people find difficult, is that two truths that seemingly are in some level of opposition are both true. That might be an overly simplified definition, but that's the one that works for me. And, you know, as I talked yesterday, as Stephen and Jan both talked, you know, a core paradox is we're radically interconnected with all things, and we have these bodies. That's why maybe the translation of non-self doesn't always work for me, because we do have a self, you know, and we also have a not self. And we in the West, we're so oriented toward this or that. You know, only one thing at a time can be true. And that's one of the things, one of the more subtle things I treasure about this practice is that we train ourselves and we learn that multiple things can be true at once, even if they don't seem like they could coexist in the same space. Well, I'll stop now, and Stephen and Jan can pick up more if they wish.
I think I just say that paradox, if we're trying to resolve paradox mentally, thinking, it doesn't work. We can't think our way out of it. It's instead, it's an intuitive understanding through the heart that we are, that doesn't have paradox. It's just something we know. It resolves those issues. You know, it's the same way that I find this practice is so helpful in making major decisions. You know, the way I would have learned, or the way the culture tells us to do it, is to make lists, right? These are the reasons I should, these are the reasons I shouldn't. We've all tried that. And for me, it never works, right? I can argue either side. I can rationally argue either side always. So you don't get anywhere. The only way to get, in my experience, to get to a solution is to get at it through a heart sense. Well, where is the heart in this? And that takes meditation. It takes quieting the heart, calming the mind, and just sort of settling and slowly, bit by bit, questioning, where's the pain? Where's the issue? Where's the real, it's sort of digging down to find, well, what's the real issue in making this decision? And once we get to the real issue, which can take some time, then the decision is clear. We know what to do. It's not a thought out kind of thing. But I find it be the case for me. And I think paradox is the same as, we're not going to think our way through paradox.
Wow, great. Thanks. Well, two heart surgeons walking down the hall is a paradox.
Stephen, that is really bad.
I know it's bad, you know. But the thing is, you know, that's what laughter is, and that's what humor is. It throws a wrench into the thinking, into the linear thinking mind. You know, here's this guy, he's supposed to give a serious answer, and he tells this stupid joke, but I laughed, right? And we all want to laugh. We need that. So,
and the paradox is it was still a stupid joke.
it's absolutely, absolutely. I need to put on my, so there we go.
Yeah.
I can tell it again. So yeah, I mean, this is why, you know, the googly eyes, and because all these words at some point are going to elicit more problems, more things to figure out. And at a certain point, just in my talk, I talked about you give up the bicycle for the kayak, and then you give up the kayak for the mountain climbing boots. At a certain point, the mind just reels and gives up. And that's the point that awakening can occur. If we're thinking this through, we're never going to get there. Although we have to think it through.
Okay. Next question. I have a question. Okay. What do we do if the retreat if during the retreat one is being flooded with painful feelings of something that is currently happening in one's life, which is very difficult and even traumatic. How to manage not being flooded by all the suffering. I'll take a quick whack. This actually just came up at the in the last discussion group. And that is, this is just one way of slicing this particular onion, the difference between pain and suffering. Pain is something real. It can be physical pain, can be emotional pain. But the suffering is the stories and the all the things we heap on top of the pain. We tell ourselves stories, we blame, we shame ourselves, we blame ourselves, we do all kinds of stuff that isn't directly related to the bare experience of the pain. At an emotional level, that bare experience could be sadness, grief, anger, some combination of those and even more. And the suffering is what we heap on top. So when we practice, and in the retreat, these sort of things have a tendency of coming up. When you meditate enough, what you've been holding down has a tendency to bubble to the surface. So that, to use the word yet again, discernment. Can we discern the pain, which is real and which I think we need to embrace with skill, from the suffering we heap on top of the pain, which is the stories and the recriminations to ourselves and others, the blame, shame, all of that stuff. So pain isn't always comfortable. It's rarely comfortable. Otherwise, we have to give it another name other than pain. But when all we're doing is experiencing the pain, in this question, emotional pain, it's much easier, and it just becomes part of life. It becomes part of the ebb and flow of life, whereas the suffering, puts its fish hooks into us that are hard to pull out. So that's
okay. I'll go next. I need to redeem myself from that joke. Yeah. So how do we practice with trauma? Is what I'm hearing, and we need help. We need somebody to talk to, or more than one person. Helpful if it's a friend on the path, or someone who loves us, or someone who's skilled. We can't be in there with it all alone. Tell the stories. Telling the stories lightens the load every time it's told. And listen to others. As far as meditation practice, to discern the strength of the trauma and to locate it in the body. The training I received as a chaplain is we can locate that pain, that emotional pain, that memory in the body, and breathe through it, and just hold it gently, be with it, allow it to be. If it grows and morphs and gets too strong, we let it go and we go back to the breath, back to the body. We go outside and take a walk. We don't let it pull us in. But when we're strong and when we feel centered, we can actually approach that bear that lives in that cave, and slowly allow it to live in the body, so that our mindfulness can perceive it. So we give space around it, and that space around it is what's healing for it. We can talk about techniques a lot, but basically, if it's too strong, get out. It's like if you're having a nightmare, wake up. That's what we do when it gets really bad. We wake up and we come back into the body. Same in meditation. If it's really, really strong, you have to just let it go and come back into the body until you feel able then to be with it again. So it's a big question, and I just hope that that helps a little bit.
Yeah. Unfortunately, oh, did you want to say something, Jim? Okay, we're out of time. We have a short lunch hour today.
Okay, I'll be quick here. I just want to echo that what was just said, that trauma needs support and skilled trauma counselors. So I would urge people to do that, and that we get through the flood by being grounded. That's what we've talked about. We can't stay in the middle of the flood. We got to get to the shore. We need grounding. So if in practice, you're able to see that overwhelm is starting as early as you can notice that overwhelm has begun, you need to ground, and we ground by connecting to the body. You can go for a walk, as Stephen said. You can, feel your hands, look around, name things you see. You have to come back into what's happening now and into the body. So we ground. Don't let the flood grow. Don't let the overwhelm grow. Get out, get grounded, and then maybe you can slowly go back in if you feel you want to.
Thank you. Maureen, you want to send us off to lunch?
Sure. Just a brief reminder before you go enjoy lunch. This afternoon, there are a couple things going on related to your Dharma groups. There are a few groups who haven't yet met individually with the teachers, and that's happening for a few groups. But then, and those groups' names are
Contentment is mine, I know.
loving kindness, contentment, and compassion. But also after that, later at 2:30, every Dharma group is meeting in a Dharma discussion group with just you kids and no teacher. And so remember what your group is. I believe in you. You can do it. You might refer back to my email that I sent where you're in your group, and there's also that link. I'll put it in the chat, the live link that lists which group you're in. And I'll give you instructions this afternoon to find the group, the name of your group, and join it. But I just wanted to remind you. So
Maybe
enjoy. Oh, go ahead, Jim.
Just remind people that the groups start right at 1. The last interview groups.
Right.
Yeah, so if you could be back a few minutes before, that would be great. And we have to log off again, don't we?
I'll end it, so you don't have, you have to log back in is the more germane point. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah. Enjoy lunch.
thank you.